Hello, we are now live. So, welcome everybody to our 2015 Oscar Marathon wrap-up. I'm Christiana Ellis.
And I'm Mike Mateen. Looks like messing up my. There we go.
It just occurred to me with the intros that it's like I'm trying to imagine who that introduction is for. Just on the, I suppose it's certainly possible that you could have a new person jump in at a wrap up if the idea is to just pick whatever the most recent part is, or if they figure, why do I need the introductions if there's a conclusion? So I've talked myself back into it. I just wanted to take everyone along on that little journey with me.
Yes, make the introduction last way longer.
Yes. So, in the interest then of not making the show take any longer than it really needs to, especially since it's been a little while now since the Oscars actually happened, do you want to start with a little bit of talk about the Oscar show itself, or do you kind of want to just get straight to the movies?
We could talk briefly about the show, I guess.
I like Neil Patrick Harris. I thought he did a fine job. Like I don't know. I've come to think of hosting the Oscars though as sort of like I've heard people say, talk about it from the, stand-up comedians talking about it as though it's kind of a thankless job, and I kind of see what they mean in the sense that I feel like there is no possible hypothetical Oscar hosting presentation that would ever satisfy everybody, because the host can only do so much as far as changing the structure of the show, and yet they, like, anything that's people don't like at all is kind of pinned on the host.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think he was fine. It was nothing special, but nothing terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, it's the content is what the content is. There's nothing the host is going to do to rise above that,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I found, not wanting to necessarily weigh the show down with faint praise right at the beginning, but I did feel as I was watching the ceremony that I felt less invested in it this year. Not so much in the movies, because I liked many of the movies quite a bit, but just, I don't know, the presentation, the show. And I didn't feel like it was because of Neil Patrick Harris, but just for whatever reason, I watched the whole thing, but I was not hanging on every word or live tweeting the way I have sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. It was, I don't want to say forgettable, but it's just, you're right. There was nothing about it that really stood out, and I said, wow, this was a really great Oscar ceremony. I can't wait to see what happens next,
Mm-hmm. John Travolta graced the internet with another GIF-worthy, meme-worthy moment. He's got to be doing it on purpose now, right?
He has to, yeah.
There's no way. Yeah, who knows? Although it's also true, that probably something like this is not, like, you tend to think of actors as like, oh, well, they should be just calm and collected. After all, they're used to being on camera all the time, right? But it's just anyway. But at the same time, this is such a very different context. I mean, not only just the idea of, like, if you're nominated, then maybe you're stressed out for that, but also just the idea that it's a very different context. And even if what you have to say is more or less scripted, it's all a very different style. So you don't have a lot of chances to do stuff like this. You know what I mean? So that's, I think, probably why even people who were used to seeing Always Cool and Collected looking kind of awkward and weird. But yeah, so I don't know. It did occur to me though that once I decided to not live tweet it, it occurred to me to wonder if there was a little bit of cause and effect there, in the sense of the years before where I have live tweeted it probably kept me invested in a way that I wasn't when I wasn't doing it. So it's possible that that would have made a difference too. If I had made the effort, I would have been more engaged. But in any case, I think it's, because we're not doing this in a super timely way, people more or less know the winners now, but we'll kind of run them down. I think we have some more in-depth conversations to have about a couple of movies now that you've seen a couple that I had seen before, and then I've seen at least one new one. But maybe we can just kind of go through the winners really pretty quickly. Minimum of commentary on each one, but then get into the more in-depth conversations.
Sure.
All right. We can just do top to bottom, I suppose, right?
Yep.
All right. So the Best Picture winner was Birdman. I think a lot of people kind of saw that coming, although it's interesting that there were a number of movies that I think were probably in strong contention this year. At least Boyhood, I know that there were a lot of people who said that they wanted Boyhood to win. I think there was a number of very good movies this year. But Birdman took a lot of the big prizes.
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of give commentary that's going to cover a couple, so it's brief. It really looked like the way that that people kind of had two favorites in Birdman and Grand Budapest. And so Grand Budapest won all of the smaller production value type stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and Birdman won the bulk of the big prizes. So that's kind of what it felt like to me. Is like, hey, we really liked this movie, so we're going to give it a few awards, but this is the movie that that we really want to win.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember if Neil Patrick Harris said it or if I read it somewhere, but just like pointed out the fact that this is Hollywood people voting. And so a movie that's about Hollywood people tends to be a favorite, and that really was evident here. So, not that it wasn't a good movie, but it was clear that that was a piece of it. So.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also, in some ways, it's kind of like the fanciest. You know what I mean? Just in terms of kind of doing sort of slick presentation and fancy things, you know what I mean, as opposed to stylistically, I suppose. I'm not sure if I'm expressing that very clearly. It was a movie with big ambitions. It's doing outside the box things, and it was largely successful doing so, which is exciting.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so do you want to alternate, or I could just read them all?
Why don't you do it, because I don't have it up. I have to click.
Okay, sure. So Best Animated Feature went to Big Hero 6. I think, hard to say. We'll talk. That's one of the ones I think we're going to talk more about a little bit later. So we'll get into that. It wasn't my favorite movie this year, or in terms of animated, but of course my favorite animated movie this year was not nominated. So, Best Director went to Alejandro G. Iñárritu for Birdman. And then Best Actor, the Academy rubbed it in my face that I didn't manage to see Theory of Everything, because I saw 4 out of 5 of the Best Actor performances, and then they gave it to Eddie Redmayne for The Theory of Everything, the one of the 5 that I had not seen. So.
Yep, and that's a pretty. I don't want to take away from the award by any means. But if you do a good job portraying a famous person, you have a leg up. If you do a good job portraying a disability, you have a leg up. He did both very well, from my understanding. So it was. That's pretty standard Oscar fodder, as they say. So. But you have to do the job, which he clearly did.
Yeah. So he seems like a nice guy.
Yeah.
Next, Best Actress went to Julianne Moore for Still Alice. That seems like it was that's an example of one of the things we talked about in terms of why the movies in the Best Actress category often tend to be very like a different list than all of the other categories, and how that's because tends to be the smaller, lesser-known movies sometimes that give actresses the best roles to play. And I think that Still Alice seemed like a good example. It's almost the archetype of that kind of movie, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly not something made for, like mass consumption necessarily, but more about, art and meaning and all of that. But anyway, it seems like a good performance from the little clip they showed. I didn't see the movie. Best Supporting Actor went to J.K. Simmons for Whiplash, which I saw 4 of the 5 of those as well, and certainly my favorite of those. Best Supporting Actress went to Patricia Arquette for Boyhood, who was very good, and then made a very inspiring speech, and then clarified it a little bit backstage in a way that made some people mad. So I don't know did you follow any of that drama, Mike?
I know what she said, but I didn't see the follow-up behind it.
Well, basically, she said in the show, obviously, she's just talking about, like women's rights and income inequality and that sort of thing, which is, I think, a lot of people can get behind that. But then I guess the way she phrased some follow-up comments afterwards implied, like, it could be taken to mean, well, we helped out black people and gay people with their rights, now they need to help us. Which obviously that particular way of putting it could be really offensive, right? And so I think a lot of people did take it that way and were really mad at her afterwards. I got the impression from the comment that it was off the cuff speaking, and she almost certainly did not mean it that way, but the internet likes to get mad at people.
Yep. I was back to the movie though. I'm really glad that she won, because both her and Ethan Hawke really hold the movie together, and they make it make sense over the 12 years or whatever. And she had the more difficult role than he did. He did fine. The glue that really kept that movie together. So I'm glad that she won.
I really liked Emma Stone in Birdman also, but I don't know that I necessarily thought she should win over Patricia Arquette. Yeah. Best Original Screenplay went to the writers of Birdman, which is a lot of people with hard-to-pronounce names to a degree that it almost feels like parody. But Alejandro G. Iñárritu, the director, Nicolas Jacobone, Alexander Dinelaris Jr., and Armando Bo. I didn't mean to say any of those with sarcasm or anything. I'm just trying to pronounce them, and that it was more work than usual. No judgment there, just...
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, Best Adapted Screenplay went to Graham Moore for Imitation Game, and I was more pleased with his acceptance speech. Made me more okay with that movie winning. I don't know. I liked that movie okay, but I didn't really feel like the screenplay was all it could have been necessarily. But at the same time, he seemed like such an engaging person, and was happy to win. Seemed like he had a good story for why he wanted to write that movie. I thought so. I kind of liked his speech. Made me feel better about it.
Yeah, I really liked his speech. I hadn't seen the movie yet, but.
Mm-hmm. The best foreign film went to Ida from Poland. Neither of us saw any of those.
Nope.
So, yeah. Best original score went to Alexandre Desplat for Grand Budapest Hotel, which made me very happy. Because I really liked that score. Best original song went to Glory from Selma instead of Everything is Awesome from the Lego Movie, which, I don't know, Everything is Awesome, I thought, as we have discussed, it was kind of extra meaningful. It was kind of in place of having the movie be nominated. But Glory was also a really good song, and I liked it, and I thought it was fitting. It plays over the end credits in the movie, but so I wasn't too mad about it.
No, and if they were voting just based on that night, that performance was pretty cool too.
Yeah.
It made me feel pretty good about it winning. Just like you were saying with the acceptance speech on the last one. I wanted Everything is Awesome to win because I wanted the Lego Movie to get an award. I thought that the performance of that was a lot of fun, with the Lego Oscars and just the production value that was put into it. But then I saw Glory and I was like, wow, okay, that can win too. That's pretty impactful, and a really well done performance. So.
Yep. Best production design went to the Grand Budapest Hotel, which is great because that's so much of what's fun about that movie is just how everything looks, including like the miniatures of the hotel itself, the exterior, and just all the funny little sets and everything just looks so fun in that movie.
Yeah.
Best cinematography went to Birdman, which I have to say. I certainly, so the thing to talk about there, of course, and we'll get more into it later, is all the sweeping one-take shots, the long shots where they don't cut. But I have to confess, I didn't actually really notice that, especially when I saw it. Once people started talking about it afterwards, I was kind of like, oh yeah, I guess they did that. I don't really remember.
Well, I feel like that's what made it good is it wasn't like it didn't call attention to itself like a gimmick. It felt like part of the movie.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't gimmicky. It was just kind of the movie flowed, and I'm sure that really contributed to the way the movie flowed. But even if you don't notice, it still is going to have that effect.
Yeah.
Best costume design went to Grand Budapest Hotel, and again, great costumes in that movie. Best makeup and hairstyling, also Grand Budapest Hotel, and in particular, they highlighted that Tilda Swinton's makeup making her look like that old lady.
Yeah.
Tilda Swinton's so fun. I just feel like every time I see her name that she's going to be in something, it's like, oh, all right. There's this one gets me halfway to the theater just having her name on the poster.
That's good.
Best documentary feature went to Citizen 4. I didn't see any of them, but that was the one that I had at least heard of.
Yeah. I think that's on HBO now, so I'm going to try to check that out. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. Best sound mixing went to Whiplash, which I think, there was a lot of movies this year that I think did sound really well, but Whiplash, of course, is one where you've got a lot of really quick cuts jumping around while you're showing, jazz music being played very quickly and so on. So having all of that play together, that's a challenge.
Yeah.
Best sound editing went to American Sniper. Sure, why not?
Yeah, it was good.
Best visual effects went to Interstellar. And I was thinking that probably a big part of that, some stuff that I hadn't known before, is that part of what made some of its effects so striking is that it was actually not all CGI. Some of the effects, they actually used miniatures, which is kind of cool. I hadn't realized that, but if you can find online some of the behind the scenes stuff of some of the things they did with the effects, and it's pretty cool. It made me appreciate them even more than I had already, and given the fact that really I think 90% of what I loved about that movie was really tied into how beautiful all the stuff in space looked.
Right.
And I'm just realizing how uncommon it's got to be that you didn't see any of the movies nominated for Best Visual Effects.
Yeah, that's funny. I guess yeah. I think because I was so far behind this year that when I was able to see movies, I had to choose things that had multiple nominations, and the majority of these do not.
Yeah. Best film editing is the last category. That also went to Whiplash, which did have great editing for the same reasons that I mentioned a moment ago with sound mixing, is that all of the jumping around while the music is playing it's really effective how that all played together.
Cool. I mean, I'm glad it won those because it made me more interested in going to see it. Where I don't know that I would have had any interest otherwise.
I definitely think it's a good one to see, although in particular, like saying it has really good sound mixing is not necessarily the reasons that I would have given. But to be sure, it's nice to see a movie that was made well get rewarded for that. Yeah. But so, with the winners covered, there's been, we've each seen some new movies. So I saw Foxcatcher, which maybe I can talk about just briefly before we get into some of the ones where we've both seen them now.
Yeah.
Foxcatcher is a weird movie, and I feel like I understand a little bit better now why, for example, you might have a movie get nominated for Best Directing but not Best Picture, especially when you also have, a Best Actor nomination, a Best Supporting Actor nomination, a Best Screenplay nomination. Like, why all of those things and not Best Picture also? It's because it's a weird movie. It's based on a true story. Sorry. It's based on a true story, and it's a weird true story, so the movie is got a weird story as a result. I have mixed feelings about it. Like, there's a lot of stuff that's really good, but it also it occasionally feels a little bit like a one-trick pony. In particular, this is something that I think I mentioned to you when we were recording for Survivor this week. I was in the middle of watching it, and the movie has a lot of times where the character does not react to what has just happened. They just stare for a long time without speaking, and then have minimal, slowly spoken dialogue. And I'm just kind of illustrating what I'm talking about. Like, that happens a lot in this movie. In particular, Steve Carell's character does that. I suspect he is, because he's, of course, playing a character who's based on a real guy. So my guess is he is emulating the real guy's way of speaking. I kind of hope so, because it's such a weird character otherwise. It's one of those truth is stranger than fiction things, I suspect, because the character is so strange that you sort of feel like if it's not actually the way the real guy was, nobody would have chosen to play him that way.
Right.
Like I said, the movie's good, but a lot of what it's good at are things that we don't normally, like having an extended scene where what the characters are doing make you really feel really awkward and uncomfortable on their behalf. Like that can be effective at the same time that, like, a lot of movies don't do that because it's actually not necessarily fun for the viewer. But at the same time, like, so I really didn't know anything about the true story of Foxcatcher and John DuPont and Mark Schultz and all the characters in this movie. The basic premise is that we have a wrestler played by Channing Tatum, who actually is really good in this. I mean, I've increasingly been thinking of him as someone who's a good actor, or rather at least a good movie star that I enjoy seeing movies with him in them. But this is a really pretty impressive performance too. And Mark Ruffalo is his brother. They are both wrestlers, and they both won gold medals in the 1984 Olympics. As an example of something that was a recurring theme throughout the movie, I wish I had known a little bit more about how wrestling works and maybe what the rules are and how it works in the Olympics, or I wish that the movie had told me a little bit more about it, because some of those things, like, I felt like, how did they both win gold medals?
So different weights, I'm assuming.
I'm sure that's it, but I didn't know that, and the movie didn't tell me that. So, in fact, actually, this is very early on, so it's not really a spoiler, but an example of how this movie is kind of subtle with some of this stuff in a way that's good. For example, we see Channing Tatum's character, and we get a caption that it's 1987, and he's going in to speak at like a middle school or something like that. And he is talking about, work hard, achieve your dreams, all that sort of thing. But we can see how uncomfortable he is. Like, he knows the words to say, but this is not his thing. He's uncomfortable. But then later we see him in the office, and the principal is writing a check and starting to write it out to David Schultz, and he's saying, no, Mark Schultz, actually. And she's like, what do you mean? He's like, well, David's my brother. I also won gold. We both won gold. And then she looks at him like she thinks he's full of shit. But then later we see him go back to his place, and there is a picture of them both holding up a gold medal. So it's like, oh, okay, well, he actually was telling the truth. He's just the kind of guy that you look at him and you feel like he's full of shit even when he is telling you the truth. Not like a slimy guy, but just like he doesn't look like he has his act together.
Right.
In any case, what we see is that there's a lot of love and loyalty between these two brothers, but also a little bit of resentment. And again, I guess it's the different weight classes thing, but there's like a scene early on where it really implies that the older brother, played by Mark Ruffalo, is actually the better wrestler. And yet, most of the movie, when we're talking about like who's the one we're pinning our hopes on to win, it's it's David, or Mark, I'm confusing the names, the younger brother played by Channing Tatum. Although I guess there's also just the element of, okay, it's complicated. I don't need to be getting that far into it. The point is that Steve Carell plays John DuPont, a uber-rich, super wealthy guy, heir to the DuPont fortune, which is not small, and he has recently decided that he's into wrestling, and he wants to sponsor a wrestler to try to go to the next Olympics and win another gold medal. And so he basically says, I want you to come train at my wrestling facility, and I will pay for your training in the sense that I will pay you if you come and you train here, and you work with all of the other people you're going to train with, and we can train the whole U.S. Olympic team at my facility. And everyone's saying, well, that's really generous, because he actually puts together a really nice facility, and it's a very generous offer. But at the same time, every time you talk to him, he's kind of a weird guy, and there's always this feeling of like, sometimes people are just weird, and that's okay, especially if they're doing something really nice, like they have a lot of money that would really help you out, and they are offering it with not really any obvious strings attached. It seems to be a completely good offer, and do you really want to judge someone just because they're a little bit weird or socially awkward? That's not really, you don't want to do that. But sometimes you're just talking to them and you just sort of feel like it just makes your skin crawl a little bit. And so that's really probably all you really need to know going in, unless you happen to know the real story, in which case you already know what happens. So
I don't.
No need to get further into it, but it's, like I said, it's well made. It's certainly got good performances in it. The writing is good, but it's just chosen a weird story to tell. And I guess, it's a true story, but I also just sort of feel like, I guess it's interesting, but I didn't necessarily love hearing about it.
Okay.
Anyway, so that was Foxcatcher. Of the movies that you've now seen since the last update, what do you want to start with?
Whatever. Let me think which I've seen. I saw Birdman, Big Hero 6, and Boxtrolls.
Okay. Let's start with the animated ones.
Okay.
How about Boxtrolls?
I went and made time to see that because of the praise that you gave it on our last show.
Mm-hmm.
How it wasn't something you thought you'd be interested in, but you really did enjoy it. I liked it. I didn't feel as strongly as I felt that you did about it.
Mm-hmm.
When I finished it, it wasn't. I didn't say, okay, next time I talk about this movie, I'm going to recommend it because it exceeded my expectations. Part of that might be because I had been given some better expectations going in from you, so I wasn't going in with better expectations.
Mm-hmm.
It was fine. I think it was entertaining. It was a good story. It was really well made, with the stop motion, and it had I see what you were saying when you were talking about how, like, you almost have to be careful and know your kid before you would let them watch this.
Yeah.
Because it's not just the things that happen. The whole look of the movie has an almost, a nightmarish, like, it reminded me a lot of, like, Coraline and things like that, where it was a little off-putting, but in a good way that got you into that, like, story mindset. So I liked that a lot. I mean, I liked the movie. I just, I was kind of done with it after I finished. So
Sure, yeah, and I think that's totally fair. I mean, when we think back to, I think back to the context that I watched it in, it was more like, well, I'm watching it because it's on the list. I don't know, wasn't necessarily into that, and then I came away saying, oh, well, yeah, it was really sweet. But yeah, it's like it's more technique than I thought. That the story is just it's even though it's kind of weirdly dark and having it's more or less an allegory for like a Holocaust, right? I mean, it's I but at the same time with such a light touch, really, you know what I mean? It's not really about trying to tell that story. It's more just kind of parallels, thematic parallels, but at the same time with a much lighter touch. But yeah, I don't know. It was just it's sweet, but I like it as a movie for kids who also liked Coraline. I think maybe that's the measure. We got a comment. Incidentally, in the meantime, so I'll cover that now. We got Brian Weber, also known as Arkle, left a comment, and he was commenting, referring to the Patricia Arquette thing. Feministing, which is a website, had some great articles about it. It kind of goes to that whole problem of what people call white lady feminism, which is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Feminists who often ignore or occasionally are even downright hostile to women of color and trans women. Michelle Goldberg from The Nation is one of the worst of this type, and What's-Her-Face from Facebook, who wrote that book Lean In, is pretty bad too. I'm sure you've seen the type. When Miley Cyrus twerks, they praise her for embracing her sexuality, but then unironically turn around and slut-shame Nicki Minaj for dancing the exact same way. It's a topic I read/listen to podcasts about a lot, as you may have guessed from this and my daily retweets of Citizen Radio. So there's additional context for that aspect of it. I had been vaguely aware of that as a potential thing, but at least what I had read of what she said. Again, it's not even what she said during the show. It was an after comment. But I don't know, it struck me in that example as being a little bit more of a, she was speaking off the cuff and phrased it badly, but at the same time, it certainly could be a thing, you know what I mean? The idea that, one group, while might be having some valid complaints, tends to downplay the struggles of others. Wouldn't be the first time people have done that.
Yep.
But so anyway, let's talk now then about Big Hero 6.
I love this movie.
Yeah?
Yeah. And this one, again, it exceeded expectations. I wasn't really sure what to expect out of it. The previews didn't do much for me. It was just kind of like, what is this movie with this big blob thing? I'm sure, and it's nominated and it's Disney or whatever, so I'm sure it's fine. But it's not the Lego Movie. And then I watched it, and I just loved the ride that this movie took me on. It was funny. It was charming. If for any movie that wasn't the Lego Movie to win, I was happy that this one did. This was my favorite of the other 3 animated movies that I saw. I obviously didn't see the foreign ones or the smaller ones, but
yeah, I didn't either.
Yeah, but I thought it was way better than How to Train Your Dragon 2. I thought it was better than The Boxtrolls. It was just a more complete movie. Those movies had interesting things, but this was a complete movie the same way that I felt like the Lego Movie was a more complete movie, and it made me laugh and smile a lot more. I mean, Boxtrolls wasn't really meant to make you laugh or smile. Like, even the funny parts are pretty dark, like the cheese thing. But Big Hero 6 really had some times that I was, I know it's a cliche now, but literally laughing out loud. Like just sitting watching this movie just with a big grin on my face. And then of course, he has and it ends in a way that I thought was really great. That he has that hero moment to save them, and then they go and basically have to go and try to recreate him. I mean, I thought that was a lot. I thought that was interesting. An interesting way to end it, where it was kind of like a death because he had grown attached to the one particular one,
Mm-hmm.
and also acknowledge that this was about robotics and that you could go back and make another one
Mm-hmm.
because of the skill set. I just thought that was an interesting way to finish it because I don't feel like it diminished the fact that the original one died. I just thought it's just not something you normally see in a movie is, oh, well, we'll just make him again, you know? And it could so easily go wrong and be like, well, that's not how things work in real life. You can't just recreate something when it's dead. But this particular thing you can, you know? So I just thought it didn't go wrong, and I give the movie a lot of credit for that, so.
Yeah. There's a lot of fun stuff to like in that movie. I can imagine that it, in some ways, at least based on my own review of it, it's almost the opposite issue, maybe, with Boxtrolls, where in the sense of Boxtrolls, I didn't really expect anything of it, and so then everything it did right was something is like, oh, I'm pleased to tell you about this thing that this movie did right. Whereas Big Hero 6, I think I had bigger expectations for, and although I did enjoy it quite a bit, some of the things that I felt like minor quibbles or something like that end up almost being what I focus on when I talk about it.
Yeah.
I think even when I talk about quibbles, I want to, I guess, emphasize that these are really only like, there is absolutely no requirement for anyone to think about the movie with enough depth that any of these quibbles matter in the slightest. But if you are the sort of person who really likes getting into thematic messages and narrative arc and all of those sorts of discussions, I think there's some things in that movie that are not super tight. And I feel like there is not a very good connection between the bad guy and the hero. You know, like that. What the antagonist, like his whole deal, other than the fact that he steals Hero's robots to help himself work on it, there's no connection otherwise.
Right.
So, like, you could. So we get some great action with everybody fighting him, and he's got the little robots, and they're doing their own new cool things, which are super fun, but also has really very little connection to any of the themes other than, especially given that ultimately what it is we're going to fight you so that we can help you do what you've been trying to do. We're going to fight you for stealing our robots, but then do with them what you were going to do with them.
Yeah, okay, I could see that.
I mean, it's not, and again, it's like, it's not a big complaint. I enjoyed the movie a lot, but it's also just, that's why I think it didn't, there were parts of it that didn't resonate as much as maybe they could have. It was better than, for example, I think when we talked about How to Train Your Dragon 2 and how like the antagonist in that one was just like, what's his deal? Why do we even care?
Yeah.
I mean, that movie has some great stuff going for it, but the bad guy is not one of those things.
No.
And so in this one too, I did, you know, there's it is a good red herring with the bad guy. Certainly, it is a little bit of a reversal of the trope.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
Yeah, so I thought that was good too. You know, there was a little bit of the, you know, we have to suspend our disbelief that it's an adventure story for why this kid puts himself in such personal danger, especially given early on there's very little evidence to support why he should be doing so. I mean, he gets involved in this whole adventure on pretty flimsy, you know, reasoning. But there's some really great emotional moments. It's a beautiful looking film, obviously, right? And how memorable is Scott Adsit as Baymax? I mean, that's a hell of a character.
It is a great character.
I felt like I wanted everybody else to see it after I saw it so that they would understand the fist bump. Because Because I feel like that's just what I want to do with a fist bump from now on, but people who haven't seen the movie won't get it.
No. He is great. He's so funny, and again, I didn't think it was going to be that interesting of a character because the whole point is that he's very nondescript looking, like he's supposed to be. So when you're thinking about the movie, you're like, oh well, what's even going to be interesting about this guy? Well, turns out he's very interesting and funny, and I love that they build him into like they take like his original design, which is to be like big cuddly, and they're trying to make him into like this superhero thing. And that part is so much fun. I did like the theme of why I felt like Hero was getting involved in this was like this total one track mind of revenge for his brother's death. To the point where like he alienates himself from his friends when they're like, yeah, no, that's not what we thought this was all about. Like, no, that's not what we're about. I liked how that went down, and that he, didn't just immediately say, "You're right, I shouldn't be like that." Like he continued to be stubborn for a little while and worked through it properly. I thought that was done really well. So
yeah. And also, as far as, when you talk about a one-movie setup of an ensemble team of superheroes, I thought it handled that aspect of it really well, too, in the sense of first introducing us to all of these people. Who are they as characters, building in some believability there, including the one guy of the group who is not a super genius, but he's a super genius enthusiast. And I really liked, too, because one of the things from the comics is that they did preserve is all of the different character names, especially like all of the food-based ones. And so it was going to be a little weird to see how they supported that, because in the comics it's just kind of like, nope, that's just their name because it's a weird sort of universe that it's existing in. But in this one, having it be their nicknames because of the one guy who's like their mascot decides to give them all nicknames, and they are, they're okay with it, but they're mostly just amused that he has decided that's what should happen. I thought that was a really fun way to do that. I was not surprised, but also pleasant to have my suspicions confirmed when it turned out that guy was like super, super rich. Trying to think what else just having them all, come up with their various, abilities and so on. That a lot of them were non-traditional. You know what I mean? We don't just have the guy who's super strong and the guy who's super fast and so on.
No, they had to like make their stuff because they're not real. They're all like essentially like Batmans.
Right. Well, even still, but like even sort of their powered up versions of themselves with all their gear is not traditional stuff. Like you have, I think it was Honey Lemon who has like her bag that makes these weird like special grenades that do whatever she wants. That she can like program her bag to spit them out whatever combination she needs.
Yep.
And then like sort of roller derby girl. And then what's his face is just in a monster costume that can jump and breathe fire.
Yep, that's what he wanted. He just wanted the lizard, probably the dragon costume.
Yep. So yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff about that one. And now, in fact, actually, now that we're talking about it, I feel like I want to maybe rent it and watch it again. I think. So I enjoyed it quite a bit. It was more just kind of like. I feel like the Lego Movie is still maybe that's part of my faint praise for it too, is that still just continuously feeling like Lego Movie set the bar for me in terms of having lots of fun stuff happening, being really funny, but then also feeling like I think it has like an actual really good message that resonates and doesn't hit any false notes.
Yeah, I agree. I still think the Lego Movie was by far my favorite. I wanted to go into it with, okay, the Lego Movie's not going to be in there. What are these other movies about? And like when I watched How to Train Your Dragon 2, like I was in that same mindset. And so I think maybe the order that we watched them in also helped, because I think you watched Big Hero 6 first.
Yes.
Right, and
well,
I watched...
no, well, I had seen Lego Movie before Big Hero 6. But
right, but you saw it first of the ones that you were having to compare it to Lego Movie.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Just like I saw How to Train Your Dragon 2 is the first one that I had to compare to Lego Movie. And so that's probably why I have, or why I was able to forgive it by the time I got to Big Hero 6, where maybe you were still like comparing them more fresh, so just the order. So like you said, if you want to go, I would recommend going.
Well, I had actually seen Big Hero 6 before the nominations even came out.
So you didn't know that? Okay.
Yeah. One thing I did actually look up really quick is there was a series of little comments that one of my friends, Jared Axelrod, had said about Big Hero 6, which I'm just going to read now because it just raises some interesting points, I think. And he says, Big Hero 6 is one of my favorite movies of the year, but it says something that the story arc has to be put on pause for superhero action. Not sure if this is because of the nature of superhero stories or because of how we view them, a limited medium or a limiting viewpoint. It's not like there's no possibility for action to be metaphorical and transformative. The history of Hong Kong action cinema speaks to that. Which raises the question, is violence even essential to a superhero story? If it isn't serving the arc, can you leave it out? You could remove the boss fight from Big Hero 6, skip right to Hero and Baymax diving through the portal, and the narrative arc remains intact. Fight scenes are in superhero stories for thrills. If you can be thrilling while zooming through another dimension, maybe you don't need fights. This has been Jared Overthinks Children's Movies. Tune in next week to hear why Empire Strikes Back ruins the character arcs in Star Wars.
Yeah. I agree that you don't need the fights to make the movie, which I think is part of what makes it a good movie, is that you remove the superhero-y part and you still have a complete story. But as Birdman so cleverly pointed out to us, sometimes it's a lot of fun just to have big, cool shit flying around and blowing up, Probably my favorite part of that movie, when that happens and he looks right at the camera and goes, "Look at all their eyes, they love it."
Yeah. On that note, so let's go ahead and let's talk about Birdman.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. It's a really well-made movie. I liked Grand Budapest better. I wish that would have won. Not sad that this won by any means, though. It probably meant more to the people who were voting, like we talked about briefly at the beginning. I bet a lot of the struggles and the things that he's going through about like trying to be relevant, like really resonate with the Hollywood crowd and the people who were voting, that to a level that made it even more impactful. Like, I still think the story works if you're not in that same mindset, but I could see that being more transformative to someone who has maybe had some of those same thoughts, and it just kind of hits home a little bit more. So I think that's what elevated it to get that win. Whereas for me, while I understood and was able to travel through the character's troubles and got it, and I was empathetic towards him, I didn't necessarily feel that it hit home for me. Not to say that maybe it's just at a different time or a different place, maybe this movie means more, but it didn't do that for me. But I can see how it could. But as far as just the way it was put together, the writing, the acting, the ambition of what it's trying to do, was really, really well done. I liked that it was, it told the story in a non-traditional way. It could have very easily told the exact same story with none of the extra pieces, like the weird stuff, like Birdman always talking to him, and that he imagines that he has these superpowers like in real life, and it shows it like he actually does.
Yeah. That's the first shot of the movie, is we see him meditating in his underwear, floating 3 feet above the floor.
Yeah.
So it tells us in that very first shot, we probably have a case of unreliable narrator here, which is not something movies do very often.
Right. So yeah, I love, because you, like I said, you could have told that same story of a guy struggling to be relevant and, doesn't feel like he's done anything with his life and is, but he's made a lot of money and been very successful, but he's trying to do something important. That whole story could have been told and it would have been fine. The fact that they put in this whole otherworldly stuff into it made it so much more fun while still having a deep meaning. So I thought that was very good. So.
Yeah, I think, as I said before too, I think you and I are on the same page, just in the sense that Grand Budapest Hotel is just such a delight that it was certainly my sentimental favorite going into Best Picture. But certainly Birdman was like my number two. Because in addition to, I think, just being expertly made, as we've already talked about a little bit, in some of the way, the way you were talking about how maybe it resonates with Hollywood types more. I could see that, but I feel like, I'm not a Hollywood type, obviously, but as a creative person who tries to do art sometimes, there is a lot of that it really resonated with too. In particular, the making the whole artist's inner voice literal in the movie, by having the character of Birdman talk to him and stuff. But certainly anyone who's tried to do art, whether it's writing,
the artist's inner voice is also like the thing. It's the piece of work that he's like least proud of.
Well, yeah, totally. And I think, but I mean, that's definitely it all plays into the same thing, because anyone who's tried to be a writer, or I'm sure it's the same with artists and musicians and everything. And it's probably not even really, it's not unique to artistic things either, but just this idea of imposter syndrome, where like you care so much about how it goes, but it's this emotional roller coaster of you're trying to write something, and for a few golden moments you're feeling like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing that has ever been written, I am a genius. But then you sit down the next day and you look back over what you wrote and you just go, sucks. This is terrible. This is garbage. I should just give this up. This is pointless. And it's this constant thing of, it's the inner critic, because the inner critic is simultaneously something that makes the experience very painful, because it's finding fault with everything you're doing, but it's also how you make it better, right? If you stay at that point where you have the rough draft that you think is genius, and then you never find anything wrong with it, it's never going to get any better than that draft, which is probably not actually very good.
Right.
Just because first drafts are never that good. Yeah, with some exceptions maybe, but generally not. And so that ability to look at your own work and tell what's wrong with it is simultaneously how you make it into something that's better, but also what makes sometimes producing a finished work of art a harrowing, emotionally wrought process. And I thought that the movie, by making that literal, I thought that was really interesting, because him having this whole, because it's not just, is it good, is it not, but this idea of, he knew he did something that was popular, but he did not respect it himself in the same way. And so here he is, he's trying to do something more important, but he still has that part of his brain that's just saying, what are you doing? You're just a movie actor. You think you're some genius playwright, author, director. No, you suck. You're a guy who put on a costume and stood in front of special effects. And it's that same thing, because at the same time that it's useful when it helps you find something wrong so you can fix it, lots of times it's more painful because you can't tune it to always be helpful, constructive criticism.
Yeah.
And so that aspect of it, and then also just all the stuff about behind the scenes at the play just reminds me of when I used to do community theater and even some of the improv stuff that I do now, and just how crazy all that can be. I thought was really fun too. And the idea that all of these other characters around him, even the ones that at least superficially look like they've got their acts together a lot more, are also they're also very messed up in their own ways. Like Ed Norton's character, I thought, is a good example of that too. Like, he's someone who is so talented that he gets away with a lot of crap to the point where even he is starting to think that it's probably not good for him, and yet he doesn't know what to do about it.
Right.
So it's like, nobody ever calls me on anything.
Well, that's the whole basis between him and Emma Stone's relationship, is that like she grounds him. Like, that's what he likes about her, is that she doesn't let him do that, and like the silly like game, the truth or dare thing, like he always said truth, he would never do dare, and he would always tell her like the exact truth. And there's even a scene where she was asking like, how do you go down there and pretend on that stage every night, and he's like, that's the only place I'm not pretending. I thought that was such a great, like, it was just really cool to watch that happen, because like that's why he liked being around her, is because he could tell the truth, and normally he's just always this show. Like, I mean, even the fact, like, after the first article comes out and Michael Keaton's so fired up about him stealing the front page and all that, he's in a tanning bed, like, it's just such a perfect, like, what is this guy, And then when you see his real side, like, he was really engaging. It was fun. I really liked his character.
Yeah, me too. I feel like if J.K. Simmons hadn't won Best Supporting Actor, I think I maybe would have liked to have it go to Ed Norton.
Yeah. He was really good. Obviously, I talked earlier what led us into this. My favorite scene is when, like, the Birdman thing just goes off the wall, and the giant dinosaur creatures like crawling, like there's missiles shooting everywhere, like it turns into a true action movie, and he flies right into the camera and just says, "This is what it's all about. Look at everybody's eyes light up. They don't want this like sentimental talking bullshit. They want to see stuff blow up." And you're kind of like, you feel almost like guilty.
Yeah.
Like, exactly, you feel like exactly how his character feels, is that, this thing's telling me the truth, even if I don't like it. Like, so I thought that was an amazing scene, not just because it was funny, but it really, like, kind of caught me, and I was like, yeah, I kind of do like this, and I don't want that talking stuff, but I was enjoying. I was enjoying talking, right? Like, because it's important, and I'm not just saying that. I don't think, like, it makes you just call yourself out and be like, I think, yeah.
Well, so the inner voice again, that idea of like it's telling the truth. Well, what it makes me think of is that classic bit from The Big Lebowski where I'm blanking on the name. His friend, played by John Goodman.
Oh, I don't remember his name.
It's going to drive me crazy. Anyway, though, he had just been, mouthing off and causing trouble and everything, and he's saying, "Am I wrong? Am I wrong?" And then the dude finally just goes, "You're not wrong. You're just an asshole."
Yeah.
And I think that's what the inner voice can be a lot of the time, is that, like, is it telling the truth? Well, yeah, maybe a flavor of the truth, but sometimes it's saying it in the most destructive way, not the most helpful way.
Yep.
Yeah.
Again, I love that scene because it put you in the narrative, like in his shoes, and you were like you said, it called you out in a destructive way, and like you said, it's a flavor of the truth. I was enjoying the rest of the movie just fine,
Mm-hmm.
And then it showed me all this big, shiny, fancy, like, action stuff, and it was like, you like this, don't you? And I can't lie and say I didn't enjoy it. But then when it tries to make it sound like you liked that better, and you kind of get into this argument, and you're not really sure, you know? So I like that. My second favorite scene in the whole movie was when he confronts the critic in the bar.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, it's just an interesting dynamic, and like she calls him out what he's basically been feeling himself.
Mm-hmm.
She bluntly like says it not as his inner voice, just as a critic, but she's also being an asshole, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And while she's right that she doesn't, you know, she's right to be frustrated with the, you know, the fact that he can get in and do that because, you know, he's been in the movie industry and he's been a part of that, and so there is a little bit of entitlement. Like, all those things that she says about him are accurate. She just says it in a very mean way, and she's taking a mean course of action.
Right. Well, it's clear that she has closed herself off to even the possibility that he could do anything good. Like, she's not even really willing to consider that, who knows, maybe this will be the exception who actually does something great. Just, you know, she's closed herself off to that possibility. And there's also that aspect of you know, the artist's relationship with the critic, right? Now, I definitely value critics quite a bit. I think that they perform an incredibly valuable function, you know what I mean? But at the same time, that he has this position also of just saying, so easy for you to just sit back and judge what other people are doing, but what are you actually putting out into the world? What are you actually risking with what you do? And, you know, I think there's that too. And I think one of the things that's great about, like, that scene and a lot of the things in the movie are, again, kind of what we've talked about is, like, flavors of truth. There's not a right person there's not a person who's right and a person who's wrong in that argument.
Yeah, because he's not very nice coming back to her. Like, he's an asshole back to her, even though some of the things he's saying are true. So both of them have things that are true, but they're saying it in such a mean way to each other. Yeah, so it's not my favorite in, like, oh my god, that was so awesome of a scene. I just really liked how that worked, and you couldn't really be on either of their sides. Like, there was no hero in that scene. Like, it almost, and I think that was the way it was meant to be. Like, you're almost supposed to feel like he's the hero for calling out the critic on just doing bullshit, and she's so narrow-minded. But he doesn't come across looking that way. Like, he still comes across like kind of a jerk also, you know? So there was no winner in it, and it really just made me think, like, exactly what we were talking about is that it goes back to the thing with the dude saying, you know, you're not wrong, you're just an asshole. Like, that's the whole thing was that.
And, you know, this gets a little into spoilers, but what I thought was super funny, too, at the end, was that what finally wins her over and gets her to write a nice article is the stupidest, most irresponsible, gimmicky stunt ever.
Yeah.
It's such a Hollywood thing to do, and yet that's what wins her over.
I think that's the joke, like a joke of the movie. Like, it's just I think that's a little just like fun shot at critics, like that part. Yeah. It was really fun, yeah, that he has to do that to, yeah.
I also liked, just as a running gag, the idea that, you know, we've got a bunch of unstable people in this profession just because it attracts those kinds of people generally anyway. But that idea of you have to kind of work around those things, especially when you're so close to showtime. You know what I mean? So, like, when you have this whole bit, first of all, again, it's one of the examples of the telekinesis where he's going and meeting with this original actor who's just not doing what he wants, and he's getting more and more frustrated, and then finally light falls from the ceiling onto his head. And then just Michael Keaton's just like, and like his reaction is like, I just made that happen. Is anybody else going to realize that I made that happen and yell at me? No? Okay, well, I'm going to walk away then. And then the idea that he goes and he tells his manager, the Zach Galifianakis character, the producer, I guess, goes and tells him, I did that. And Zach Galifianakis is just kind of like, okay, I'm just going to pretend you didn't say that because I have no response to it and it doesn't matter anyway. But also just that character realizing that 80% of his job is making sure that the actors don't have a full-on meltdown, or at least not enough of one that prevents them from putting the show on.
Yep.
You can have micro meltdowns in your dressing room. We'll clean it up later. That's fine, as long as you're going to be on stage in 5 minutes.
Yeah. And I mean, I kind of knew the scene where he gets trapped outside and has to like walk back to the theater in his underwear. I knew it existed.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't prepared for like how realistic of a possibility it made it look like it was. You know,
Yeah.
like it didn't make it. It just made it look like he wasn't paying attention, but it also made it look like he wasn't just doing something destructive.
Mm-hmm.
He was just simply like stressed out because he just saw his daughter kiss the other coworker and wanted to have a cigarette and regroup, and ended up getting locked outside and having to get back into the play somehow.
Yeah,
And then,
it was very plausible and forced into being more plausible just by the fact that it's urgent. Like the show is progressing. He needs to meet his cue. And so he can't do what you might otherwise normally do, which is just continue to pound on the door and hope that nobody comes into the alley and then someone will eventually let you in. But no, he needs to in his cue. He can't wait.
Yep.
Yeah.
So he like rushes back through the front door of the theater and then just right into character. Like I didn't know that's how it concluded.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the scene existed, and I was like, man, that's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Because it's just such an over the top, like you were saying, like, you know, like I've done theater and stuff like that before, and there's been, you know, we've all been in plays where like something doesn't go right and you just wing it and get through it.
Mm-hmm.
This was an example of that, but at such an extreme level, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was. I mean, it was good. I love talking about the different parts of it because it was so well constructed. There's so many neat things in it, you know.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of my favorite bits of just combining the unreliable narrator bits is the bit where, you know, he's been flying around. We see him flying through the city back to the theater, and then he lands and just goes to walk in, and then like all of a sudden we see that there's a cabbie behind him just going, hey, you didn't pay.
I love that.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, so Birdman, I liked it a lot. I think it's a worthy winner.
Yeah, not upset at all that it won, even if it wasn't my favorite. You know.
Yep.
So, and best director, honestly, I know that it's hard to split them, but like I almost, and as much as I love Wes Anderson, like is the reason that architected all of those things that happen in Grand Budapest. I still think, like for me, I would say that this was the best directed movie. Even if my favorite movie, what I would call the best picture, was Grand Budapest, this I still would give best director to. Even it's just it's too well put together to not with that. You know?
I want to watch it again so that I can actually pay attention and notice the big long shots this time, the long takes. I'm sure some of them are computer assisted, but that's still cool.
Oh, I mean, for sure, you'll see exactly where it's computer assisted, but it's just an interesting effect, you know.
Yeah.
So.
All right. So I think that probably does it for 2015 Oscar marathon.
What was the one movie you saw since we last? Oh, it was Foxcatcher.
It was Foxcatcher. Yeah.
That's right. All right.
All right. So thank you for listening and/or watching. We've had one viewer consistently through our live recording. I suspect it is Brian Weber, who left the comment earlier. So hello and thanks for watching.
Yep, thank you.
You, as in not you, Mike, but you, whoever is watching and/or listening to this, might be watching it on YouTube or listening to the audio version. But no matter what version, you can find it and all of the other stuff that I and we do at ChristianaEllis.com. And so, keep an eye over there for talking about Survivor's back in season now. And Lots of stuff.
Lots of Survivor coming up.
Yeah.
All right.
Good night, everybody.
Night.